Good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here and to share some time with you. And we'll talk about sows and management of sows and what things can we improve. And I hope you learn something after this talk. To start with my talk, I would like to introduce some of the things that are going on in Europe and what are the changes that we are facing. And like this, I give you a little bit of update. So for those of you that don't know the pig business that is going on in Europe, I have to say that just some characteristics of this part of the world where I come from is that we produce more pork than what we eat. So you'll see here in the picture, every black dot that you see, it's one farm. So you see that we have Europe plenty of pig farms. Europeans are a rich society. So when we think what represents the food over the total budget of a family, the food represents a small part of the budget. And we have a society that is highly demanding things. So it demands different things continuously. So this produced some challenges that I'm going to share with you. The first one is a health challenge, African swine fever and PRRS probably being the main ones. Then our legislation, which is pushing us to reduce the use of antibiotics every year more and more. And the recent ban of zinc oxide, which has been also a challenge. And then what is going to come, which is probably a more tight legislation on welfare, and also a legislation bringing us or pushing us to be more sustainable. So African swine fever is slowly dominating or invading more and more countries in Europe. You'll see the red areas, they start the African swine fever from the east and slowly go to the west. There are two main reasons. One is human factor, trucks, boats that bring contaminated food, and then this food is taken by wild boars. And the second one are wild boars by themselves, which slowly keep moving around Europe. So we are convinced that African swine fever is gonna cover the whole surface of Europe sooner or later. We don't know when, but it's gonna happen, and we are sure about that. The other challenge are high pathogenic PRRS strains that they came around the year 2020, and they have been spread basically around Italy and Spain. So just to give you a fast example, here you have one farm, 2-3 farms affected by these new strains, and this one over here was affected by one of our traditional strains. In black, you'll see the abortion storms. In red is the pre-weaning mortality. So you'll see that there is a big difference between these 3 cases and this one. So the other challenge I'll tell you is the reduction of antibiotics. This started some years ago, and this is the tendency. You can see here that every year we reduce the amount of antibiotics used per kilogram of pig. So the point is that we're still not happy with this. And the lower the level, the more difficult it becomes. And what makes this thing especially difficult is that we ban the use of zinc oxide in all Europe. It was on June 2022. So now we have a difficulty to control diarrheas because we cannot use a lot of antibiotics, but we cannot use also zinc oxide. So this is becoming a kind of a challenge. So I put you this picture just to understand what zinc oxide was doing. We were used to work with doses of zinc oxide which produce this intestine. This is a picture of an intestine. The purple color are the cells producing mucus. So the zinc oxide increased the production of mucus, and you see a lot of purple here. Today, we are working with a level of zinc oxide that give us this picture. So we have less purple color, so less protection on the intestine epithelium. So as a result of this, diseases, reduction of antibiotics, and ban of zinc oxide. This is what happened in the last years in Spain. You'll see here the evolution of pig souls per sow per year since 2006. We were increasing the production every year, and our maximum was the year 2020, where we sold close to 26 pigs per sow per year. Over the last 2 years, we lose 2 pigs per sow. Most of these losses are due to mortality. So if you think on sustainability, this is not really sustainable. On the other hand, we have a new legislation that it's expected to come in the next years, which is going to push us to eliminate the crates in the farms. So basically, the legislation that is expected will push us to handle the sows in the whole gestation in loose sows groups, and also is pushing us to change our farrowing facilities. For instead of using crates for sows, we will use the temporary confinement crates. So the sows will be closed just for some days, and then they have to be open. So, and the last one is sustainability. So we're going to have more controls on the way we produce feed. We have to take into account the carbon footprint in those feed that we are using for the farms. We have to take into consideration what do we do with the residues, with the slurry, how we handle the nitrogen. So this is going to increase the cost of production in most of the farms. So the result of all these challenges, you can imagine what it is. You will not see pork production in Europe growing. You will see pork production in Europe just decreasing over the next years. We will not see more farmers, we'll see less farmers. So that's going to be the tendency. So those farmers that will remain, those that we have today on the market, they have to be very productive. And the first step to be productive is to take the maximum benefit from the sows we have in the farm. So when you see the productivity in the different countries or Europe, we'll see that, Denmark is always leading. There are genetic differences, there are climate differences, there is a farm difference depending on the countries we look for, but you'll see that there are many countries in Europe already producing more than 30 piglets per sow per year. So what I'm going to share with you are those key factors that I think are important to achieve high productivity. And to understand those key factors, we first have to know what are the limitations that the new genetics are bringing to us. As we choose high prolific sows, we increase some problems. One of the problems that we increase pre-weaning mortality, because the size, the weight of the piglets at birth tend to be smaller. We reduce the weaning weights also due to this. So we have more piglets, they have to share the milk, so the weights are a little bit less, they are reduced. We increase the sow mortality. Those sows are delivering a lot of piglets, so the metabolism works a lot. So that's another problem that we have. And as a consequence of this mortality, we increase replacement rate. So I wouldn't need more than 2 hours to go through all the points that we need to solve those problems. I'm going to focus on some of the main ones, and probably, unfortunately, I will jump other things that are also important. But I just choose 4 points that I think are key. The first one is the acclimatization of gilts. I'm going to say some things about the sow feeding, sow management, and piglet management. So let's start talking about gilts. Well, gilts represent the higher proportion of our swine population or sow population in the farm. And they are also the less productive group. We need a lot of days before they go into production, so we need a lot of effort. We spend a lot of money in vaccines before they start producing. So they are the less productive, the high cost let's say, group in the farm. But they are also very important because they will be the future. So if we do a good job with them, they will behave very well in the next parities. If we don't do a good job, probably we will not take all the benefit that we could take out of them. So we want to start with good quality animals when we inseminate them, and very often this decision is based on the number of born alive that they give us on the first farrowing, the farrowing rate that they are able to achieve during this first parity as well. So very often the age, the breeding age in Europe is around 2040 days. So why? Because they increase the born alive numbers by that age, and they also have time to develop a good structure. Well, the same for farrowing rate. I mean, we also, if you look 220, 240, we are getting the best numbers on farrowing rates. But we also get some conflicts when we think about the age and the growth. When we look at what has been published, there are some papers showing that if the animals grow very well, if the gilts grow very well, normally these gilts will express a better reproductive performance. And this is what is showing here in this graph. But in general, we have animals that grow fast today, but they are lean. Genetic companies, they have done a very good job. I mean, they work on reproduction as well as with meat quality. So they are very lean animal, which is good because that means that they are more efficient. But we need fat for reproduction. We need a little bit of fat. The fat will be responsible for the production of one hormone that is called leptin. And leptin will have an influence on the brain and will determine the cascade of GRNH and then the sexual hormones FSH and LH. So if we don't have a little bit of fat, things will not work, talking about reproduction. So we need an animal that has to have different characteristics for having a good reproduction. The first one, we said, well, they have to grow fast, but they have to have also a little bit of fat, and we want that animal also to be acclimatized to our farm. So there are many things that we want at the same time, which they are not always easy to achieve. One of the difficult things is to acclimatize those animals to our farm, because we want to maintain our health status. We don't want the things to get worse than they are today, but we also want to acclimatize those animals that very often they come with a higher health status than the health status we have on the farms. So we have to expose to the contact to the different microbes, the different viruses, the different bacteria that we have in our farm. And this has to be done, let's say, in a soft way. We don't want to lose them. And we have also to give time not to introduce shedder animals that can upset our stability. So everything has to be done carefully. The first step, which is often forgotten, is that we have to check the health status of any animal that we introduce in our herd. So I know you rely on your provider, but there is also a transportation in between that we have to ensure it's right. So we have to place them in isolation, we have to check the health status, and the best thing is to check twice, to check the day of arrival and to check again maybe 2-3 weeks later. Once this is done, we can start with the acclimatization. And acclimatization will be done by using different tools. The first tool we will use are vaccines, but we can use other tools as well, like feedback or animal contact. So when we think on vaccines, if we are receiving negative animals for PRS, negative animals for myco, probably the first thing we have to do is to protect them against those diseases. But then, of course, we have to protect against other things like parvo and erysipelas, which we know they are diseases that could be everywhere. So we have to take care of those as well. But that vaccine will be the last one we will place on those animals, because we know maternal antibodies will last at least 6 months. So we don't want maternal antibodies to block the efficacy of these vaccines. But you are thinking that you use more vaccines in the gilts you introduce on the farms, and it's right, because then there are other vaccines that will depend on the health status of the different farms, and sometimes we have to apply them also during this period. They could be like the atrophic rhinitis vaccine, or the E. coli, or the APP vaccine. I like to do double vaccination on gilts like this. I avoid to vaccinate them twice during the first gestation. So, and they are more quiet during the gestation time. Some people make mistakes and they think, well, I am introducing negative animals, so I don't have to vaccinate them. Be careful. What determines what vaccines you will use in the farm is not what you get, is what you have. So, for example, if we have atrophic rhinitis in our farm, we have to vaccinate the incoming gilts to prevent them from getting atrophic rhinitis, or the same for APP. Then, of course, we can use another tool, which is the feedback. So feces from different places could be the most common thing, is feces from farrowing rooms. And why we do that? Because we know feces has enterovirus, so parvovirus. Feces has E. coli, so we will expose the new animals to the strains of E. coli that we have in the farm. Feces could have different viruses like PED virus or like rotavirus that very often are also needed during the acclimatization process. And then, of course, we will start contact with animals. Cool sows, the board that we are getting in contact, so there will be this contact. And this is important because we have some vaccines like for Mycoplasma hyopneumonia, but the contact will also help the animals to contact with other bugs like Mycoplasma hyorini, Mycoplasma hyosynoviae, where we do not have commercial vaccines for them, or other things like Pasteurella multocida or Glasserella parasuis, etc. Some people think that this is not important because they think, well, never mind, they will have the contact during gestation. Be careful, because if the animals get infected during gestation against any disease, and it could be a respiratory disease that affects the whole body because it produces a little bit of fever, this can be a cause of abortion. So we can end up by having reproductive losses even because of a respiratory disease. And this was the case in this farm. This was a very big farm in Romania that we were changing the genetics and we were introducing negative gilts for Mycoplasma into the herd. They were vaccinated during the acclimatization process, but they were not contacting the animals in the farm. So the infection was happening very late. So late that the vaccine efficacy was already very low. So when we were testing those gilts in the middle of gestation, we realized that the sows were negative for myco, but all the gilts were positive for myco. We were having abortions because of that. One disease that is difficult to handle, to acclimatize the gilts, is PRRS. And I mean, we can spend 2 hours talking about PRS and how to acclimatize gilts, and we don't have 2 hours to talk about PRS. I'm going to just go through the main points. So if we buy the gilts, the best thing is to buy them negative. Once we have them negative gilts, we have to acclimatize them, and we will use 2 things. We will use vaccine, and very often we will also use the contact with the animals. Like this, we will have some immunity produced by the vaccine, but we know the vaccines immunity is not full. So with the contact of the animals, we will achieve a full immunity. But this requires also a little bit of time. So we need around 12 weeks to ensure those animals will stop shedding the virus. And I used to say, my clients say, look, check. Because one thing is what we think is going to happen, and the another thing is what really happened. The way to know if what we think is going to happen is happening is to check the health status at the end. We would like to have gilts that are ELISA positive, so serology positive for PRS, but PCR negative without virus in the blood. So let's say something about sow feeding. So we were talking about the difficulty to have a gilt that is a fast-growing animal, but also needs a little bit of fat. So we were talking about this breeding animal at 240 days, which is this 34 weeks of age. And the weight of this animal will be between 140, 150, 160 kilos. But what happened today, we have some genetics that the animals grow so fast that we are able to have heavier animals at this age. So heavy that this could be detrimental for the longevity of these animals in the farm. So if we take as a target to reach from 30 to 140 kilos, 770 grams per day, which would be something nice to achieve, the problem very often is that we have higher growth. And then we don't have tools. We have a GDU, a grow develop unit, that has ad-lib feeders, so we cannot restrict the feed during the growing phase. Sometimes we can restrict the feed once we put them in the farm during the acclimatization process, which is not always the best. This would be over 22, 23 weeks of age. So very often we say, well, never mind. I mean, the solution will be to feed them a very, a low dense diet, low energy, low protein diet, and that will solve the problem. Well, that's not always solve the problem because they eat a lot. So you end up by having an animal that is eating a lot of feed, and so you have to reduce a lot the protein because otherwise they will get the protein they need and the energy they need. And if we reduce too much the protein, we start having another type of problems like tail biting, the animals become aggressive, so we are losing gilts for other reasons. So one solution that we are applying is we reduce the density when the animals have low feed intake, so when they are very young. So nursery phase, we reduce the growth, and we reduce the growth for more than 3 weeks. That muscle will not recover. So we will end up by having an animal that has a different composition, so has a little bit less muscle and a little bit more fat. And this is what we want in a gilt. So we have to bear in mind also that those animals are not finishers. So the diet has to be a special diet for them. What does it mean, a special diet for them? It means that it has to have more minerals, especially phosphorus. Because very often finishing diets, at least in Europe, they have very, very low levels of phosphorus. We don't want to contaminate the environment, so we use phytases as a source of phosphorus very often on the finishing. So for gilts, it's safer to use mineral phosphorus. Again, if we use finishers mineral premix to produce our feed during the GDU, during the growth of these gilts, we will realize that premixes for finishers, they do not include biotin. We need biotin for a very high quality hoof. We need also some minerals in a chelated form like zinc or magnesium or manganese to have good joints and good hoof. So that requires a different mineral premix than what we use for finishers. And give them a space. Treat them well. I mean, if they have space, they will have better quality. They will have stronger legs. They will behave better. Well, we have this gilt already bred. We have them in farrowing rooms. and we realize that they will deliver a lot of piglets. So the more piglets the sow deliver, the longer the farrowing process. And the longer the farrowing process, the higher the risk for the piglets to go through hypoxia or to suffer anoxia, which is the lack of oxygen. And this will produce two things. One, or it killed the piglet, so we have a dead pig, or we have a low viable piglet. Both things, we don't want them. Well, some people say, well, what can we do with feeding around farrowing? There is one thing that we know from the last years, and it's coming from this work. This work was showing that if there is a lot of time from the meal, from the last meal to the farrowing, the sow will lose the energy that has on the body. So during farrowing, she will be exhausted. So the farrowing time increase, and the probability to produce dead pigs also increase. The traditional way of feeding sows when they were coming into farrowing rooms, at least in Europe, was, okay, we place them in farrowing rooms, we reduce the feed because we don't want them to go constipated, and we wait for them to farrow. Today, we are doing the opposite. We are moving them into farrowing rooms, we do not reduce the feed, and we split the feedings in different times. So we feed them 3 times or 4 times a day if it's possible during the last week. So the purpose behind this is to have always energy available, because the sow, the day of farrowing, needs more energy than the last day of gestation and the first day of lactation. So that's why they become exhausted. But you know that in the pig world, we have different tendencies, different genetics. So people argue all the time about what we do and what we don't do. So this work was done in Denmark. And you know that the Americans, when something comes from Denmark, they have to test. They don't believe right away. So they were testing also with the different genetics if what did happen in Denmark was also applicable to the American sows. So what did the Americans find? The Americans find exactly the same that the Danish, but with different figures. So they did not find a reduction on stillborns when they changed from 1 delivery to 4 deliveries, or when they were giving even a bigger quantity of food. They did not change the farrowing duration. That was also the same. But what did they find? They found that when they were looking at weaned pigs, they were weaning more pigs when they split the meal in 4. So today, Europeans and Americans are doing the same. So we are trying to split the meal in more than 1 time the last week of gestation. You will see that in some of the graphs, I put here kilograms, which is on the paper, but you have to be careful on that, because papers coming from US, they use high density rations, so high energy. Papers coming from Denmark are using low, or Europe, we use low density, so low energy. So the kilograms can be different. So consult your nutritionist. They will know exactly what should be the right content or the right quantity based on your density diets. So why the last week is also important? Because if we fed the sows too little, we will influence the production of colostrum. So again, the sow needs energy to produce colostrum. So we have to keep the feeding level as it was in gestation to have a good colostrum production. But one thing is the last week, and another thing are the last month of gestation. During last month of gestation, it was said that we have to rise a lot the quantity that we offer to the sow, because like this, the piglets will be stronger, and so on and so on. We have to be careful. If we feed them too much, we will produce what is known as glucose-tolerant sows. So what does it mean? It means sows physiologically keep the glucose level a little bit higher during gestation. And this is to ensure that the nutrition of the fetus will happen all the day, regardless if they have been eating before or after. So what happens if to feed them a lot? When the sow eats, it produces insulin to reduce the glucose. But they are tolerant, so they will not react to insulin. So the glucose will be high, and this is good. But this glucose will go to the piglet through the navel cord, as well as the insulin. At farrowing, when the navel cord is cut, the glucose and the insulin remain into the piglet. But the piglet is not glucose tolerant. So the insulin inside the piglet will help the piglet to burn very fast the glucose, and they will become hypoglycemic. So they lose the energy. They become weak, so weak that they cannot drink colostrum. So you can see here, those are glucose-tolerant sows, and those are the piglets. That's the mortality. Glucose-tolerant sows piglets die double than when they are normal. And they are weak. So when we look at the nurse sows percentage, you'll see that the glucose tolerance are giving piglets to other sows to foster because they produce less milk. But not because they produce less milk, because they are not able to suckle the milk. So again, if we feed them too much, there are also papers showing that the colostrum production will be negatively affected. And you'll see here, the more they eat, the less colostrum they produce. Again, be careful with the quantities. This is an American paper, so high dense diets. So, but some people say, but we have to feed them a lot because otherwise the piglets will be weak. And this is not true. There is no paper in the world, well, there is just one, and is this one that I'm gonna show to you, showing that if we don't feed them a lot, the piglets will be weak. This is not happening at the end of gestation. It's just happened in the case of gilts, so first parity, and if those animals were bred so early, because then the gilt still is growing, still needs a lot of protein, and it does not allow protein for the fetuses. But this is not happening with multiple sows. This is not happening if you breed the gilts at the right age. So what should be a right feeding program? And don't look a lot to the kilograms. This could be variable depending on the density, but as an idea, as a guide, we have to recover the body condition lost during the first month, and by 30 days, we have to have the body condition that we would like to have at farrowing. So from that moment, we keep body condition during the central part of the gestation, and then during the last 3 weeks, we will increase the feed. But it's not to have heavier pigs. This is because the sow needs more energy and protein because the fetal growth happens during the last 3 weeks. And we don't want the sow to lose weight and protein before lactation. So I give you here the limits that can damage the gestation. So we shouldn't go lower than 21 megajoules of energy during this phase. With a typical diet in Europe, this would be around 2.2 kilos, okay? And we should not go over 33 megajoules at the end. And this would be in Europe around 3.5 kilos. Those are the limitations. If you go over that thing, we can have problems. If we go lower than that quantity, we also can have some problems. So, but the challenge is to feed and to achieve low pre-weaning mortality when the sows are delivering a lot of piglets. Why? Because these sows that deliver 16, 17, 18 born alive, big proportion of them will be lighter pigs, less than 1 kilo ones, and those are challenging. And if you look at this is a paper, a work that was done for 2 beds in Spain, San Joaquin and Vela, and they weigh individually a lot of pigs. There are close to 45,000 pigs in this table. So it's quite representative of what's going on. So more about feeding. What is driving the piglet weight at birth? We know today that the most influencing thing for the birth weight is what happened in previous lactation. So if we don't feed sows well during the previous lactation, they will produce embryos that are weaker and lighter. So the embryo weight during the first month, it's lighter in those sows that did not eat what they should. But I said the embryos are lighter, but also weaker. And you'll see they die. When the sows do not eat properly during the previous lactation, they have more embryo mortality, as you can see here. But those embryos that die are basically females. So are the embryo females that we will lose. So if we produce gilts, we are going to lose gilts. So lactation is the important thing to have heavier birth weights. Of course, if we want to have heavier weaning weights, it is good to start with heavier birth weights. But there will be other things that could also influence weaning weights. We tend to talk about averages. When we say, well, our weaning weights are 6 kilos or 7 kilos or 5.5, we are talking about this. We are talking about the average. But in a population, we have the average, but we have also the lower weights and the heavier ones. One company, the biggest company of Spain, did this work, and they were looking what happened with the different weights during nursery and during finishing. And I'm going to show you. Look, the pigs that's weighing less than 3 kilos at weaning and less than 4 kilos at weaning, less than 3 kilos, 33% of them die. Less than 4 kilos, 18% of them die. If you look at those weighing more than 9 kilos, no one died. But this is not the worst thing. This is the worst thing. 6 kilo difference at weaning become 30 kilo difference at the end of the finishing period. So 30 kilos. The lighter ones weigh 75 kilos, the heavy ones 105. So we have to give them time. Never mind what you do with the diet. They will not recover this difference unless you give them time. So what can we do during lactation to increase weaning weights? The first thing again is to feed the sow a lot right from the beginning. This is a trial in US where they were comparing a feed program that was going up during 8 days or a feed program that was going up with quantities during 5 days, or full feeding, which means ad-lib right from the beginning. And you'll see this is the piglet daily gain. So when the sows eat a lot, the piglets grow faster. Of course, full feeding is not easy. unless you have a system that allows you to feed the sows at lip. And why it's not easy? Because sows behave a little bit funny. So they will go up with feed intake, and then they will go down. So if you have to handle this by hand feeding over feed drops, I mean, this is becoming difficult because you're gonna waste a lot of pig. So when you don't have an at-lip feeding system, we have to still use, let's say, a feeding program that goes step by step going up. But the big advantage is here, even if it's difficult. And this is the movement. We are going towards at-lip feeding. So what else can we do? Well, we know that if the temperature of the room is too high, the milk production goes down. And it goes down very fast. You'll see that between 18 and 25 degrees, there is already a difference. I understand that during summer, this is difficult to achieve. We have problems in Spain even with refrigeration systems, but it's not so difficult to have the right temperature in winter. What can we do, even if we have high temperatures, to increase the milk production? Well, we can use refrigeration systems, but in summer they can do what they can do, so they have a limitation. But we can check the temperature of the water. If we use cool water, the sows eat more and the piglets wait more at weaning. I'm sure all of you are thinking about cold beer, because in summer it's also very interesting to drink cold beer. It does not need to be so cold. I mean, water at 20 degrees is enough to produce this. You don't need 4 degrees or 8 degrees. But what cannot happen is water at 28 degrees or 29, which very often happen in many farrowing rooms. And a lot of water. The sow gets tired of drinking, so they have to drink fast. To drink fast, we need high flow. High flow is more than 3 liters per minute. And we still today have a lot of farms with drinkers that do not provide 3 liters per minute. Let's go with the third point. Third point was sow management. We have talked about feeding, now let's talk a little bit about management. And we have to start talking about from the beginning. And the beginning is how we select the gilts. I mean, I know many of you will buy the gilts from an external source, but those of you that are producing their own replacement, I think it's good to hear this. So selection should start from the beginning, and that's it, choosing the right animals from birth. So we should choose those gilts with heavy weights at weaning. So heavy gilts at birth will last longer in our farms. Then if we have litters with a lot of males, we shouldn't choose those gilts, because during fetal stages, the male's hormone will affect the behavior of those gilts in the future. So those animals will have lower farrowing rates, lower prolificacy, and they will be more aggressive. Next step is weaning. So at weaning time, we choose also the heavyweights. So we shouldn't choose gilts that grow less than 125 grams per day. And we shouldn't wean future gilts earlier than 25 days, because we need a mature intestine for those animals to develop properly. Normally we have a post-weaning phase with plastic floors, at least in Europe that's very common. Well, if you have that, gilts, future gilts, shouldn't be in plastic floors with heavy weights, so maximum 20 kilos. If they are heavier, they do not erosionate the hoof, and this will change the gait. So what is going to happen by plastic floors is that we're going to end up by having more animals like this one or like this one instead of what we should have. Then if we talk about management, we have to talk also what we have to do during the farrowing process. And if we want to reduce pre-weaning mortality, because that's what happened at farrowing, that some pigs are born dead, we have to assist the farrowing. There is a big difference in mortality of pigs and viability of those pigs, the vitality of those pigs, if we assist the farrowing. So we will have an impact on born dead, but also on the mortality pre-weaning. Farrowing assistance of all the sows in a farm is not easy. So the only way we have to be present when the sows are farrowing is to use prostaglandins. But we have to use them right. If we use prostaglandins too early, we're going to have weak pigs that they will not drink enough colostrum, and this will produce us problems. When we talk about prostaglandins use, in Europe we tend to have two types of farmers. Those that love and they use them a lot, and those that hate and they never use them. I mean, prostaglandins are not good or not bad. There is a tool, and it's a tool that can help if it's used properly. So there are many papers published, and what I show you here is a paper that was reviewing all publications and arriving to some conclusions. And the conclusions are that prostaglandins can be helpful if used correctly. And then we have to use also other things to prevent diarrhea and prevent other problems. So one of those tools are vaccines. So we vaccinate sows, and we vaccinate the sows for different things. One of the things that we vaccinate is to prevent reproductive problems, and therefore we vaccinate them for parvovirus and erysipelas, probably 100% of the farms, and very often also against PRRS or even PCV2 in many farms of Europe. Sometimes we do it by cycle, like for example for parvovirus already, and for other vaccines we use blanket vaccination, so all the herd at the same time, which could be the example for PRRS or PCV2. But we also vaccinate not for problems that will be on the sow, to prevent problems on piglets. And this is the case for the E. coli vaccine or Clostridium vaccine or atrophic rhinitis vaccine. We want the mother to pass maternal immunity, maternal antibodies to the piglets to protect them. So piglets have to drink colostrum. And because otherwise those vaccines will not be effective. So let's talk a little bit about piglet management and what can we do to make them drink as much colostrum as possible. Well, we can give them colostrum in many different ways, but this is the more difficult one. So it's better if they take by themselves. So what is the difference between farms having problems, pre-weaning problems, and farms not having pre-weaning problems? Very often happens what I am going to show you here. We have a farm with high mortality, but the difference is not during the whole lactation, it's just at the beginning. That's what makes the difference between a good farm or a bad farm. And what are the differences in those pigs? When we look at piglets, for example, showing diarrhea or not showing diarrhea, and we look what do they have in the blood, we'll find out that affected pigs with diarrhea has less cholesterol immunoglobulins than pigs unaffected, meaning that they were not drinking as much colostrum as they should. So who is drinking colostrum and who's not drinking colostrum? We know that those pigs that have difficulties are the lightweights. And why? We know why since long time ago. This graph comes from 1986, 89. And it was done in Scotland. And what is showing? Is showing that the pigs under 1 kilo, which are these ones, are losing body temperature after farrowing very, very fast. they can lose up to 5 degrees of body temperature in 30 minutes. What can we do? Simple. Normally we do split nurse. We put in the box the bigger guys to allow the small guys to go and drink colostrum. And this is wrong. Those that has to go to the box are the smallest pigs, the lighters, because are the ones that are losing body temperature. So we have to recover body temperature for them to drink colostrum. Otherwise, they will not be strong enough to drink colostrum. So this has been proven by a recent work done in France. As a friend of mine, we were discussing about this, and he did not believe me, so he wanted to prove. Those are animals blocked inside the box at 34 degrees, and this is the growth the first 24 hours. In blue, those that were free, and you'll see the difference. Those are animals from 600 grams to 1 kilo, 1 kilo to 1.2, 1.2 to 1.5. So you'll see that the red ones are always growing faster. Yeah. How long they have to be under the lamp? They have to be at least 1 hour and a half. And the temperature should be 34. If it is very high temperature, they start to be brown and smelly. So be careful. So when they have to drink colostrum from their own mother. So once they are warm, bring it back to their own mother, not to another sow. The colostrum from the own mother, they will take full advantage. So they will absorb immunoglobulins, which are proteins, but also maternal cells, which are key for the immune reaction. And then, at least in Europe, some farmers would like to classify pigs. Light, medium, big, each size in a different sow. Does it help? Well, that has been the question for many years, and now we know exactly the answer. Look, I will focus just in those two squares, where it's the weaning weight and the piglet removal. You'll see when we have uniform litters, the small pigs, the light, they take advantage. They will have heavier weaning weights at the end of lactation. But the heavy ones, it's the opposite. They would be lighter if you place them in 1 liter. So it's better to have them mix. And the same for the pig removal. Light pigs will benefit. We reduce the pigs that has to be removed, but for the heavy ones, it's the opposite. We increase the number of pigs that has to be removed. So having light pigs in 1 liter is good, but the rest should be mixed. Fostering is risky, but high prolificacy pushes us to do fostering. Cross-foster, it shares disease. Not just because we move piglets, because very often we move back the sow, and the saliva from previous piglets remain on the teats of the sow, and the new piglets will become infected. So fostering is the way to keep PRRS circulating in farrowing rooms, or it's also the reason to keep circulating influenza in farrowing rooms. So we are getting at the end. We have to talk a little bit what happened at weaning with the piglet. So at weaning, we know that if the piglets never try the feed, they will go over anorexia period. So they will spend some hours before they try the feed. And we know this for different reasons, but this is a very nice work, which is this one that we have here, that was showing this very clearly. So you'll see that pigs that were eating pre-starter by 10 hours, most of them, these are the pigs that are eating, those that remain without eating here. So 90% of them are eating by 10 hours. Those that were not eating pre-starter or were not offered, they need, look, to arrive to 10%, they need like 25 hours. So 25 hours without eating, you can imagine what happened later on. They will go to the feed, they will eat a lot, that feed cannot be acidified, therefore they cannot be digested, and this animal will have diarrhea as a consequence. So it is not a matter of if we allow them to eat pre-starter, because in this trial there were some pigs that were allowed to eat pre-starter, but they didn't want to eat. So we have to push them to eat. How we can teach them, how we can stimulate them to eat. There is one very simple way that we try, and we try it very successfully. We realize that they are not eating because they don't use how to use the drinkers. They don't know how to use the drinkers in farrowing rooms. So we decide to put an extra plate with water. Sorry, I keep making the same mistake. An extra plate with water. So we start 5 days of age with a water plate. 10 days of age, we introduce the feed. And we follow them, not just at weaning, also post-weaning. So what happened when we compare those animals that we introduced the water with other animals where they got no more water rather than the drinker? And we also tried different things. So we thought, well, and if we introduce other things on that water, like dextrose, a sugar, or sweetener, well, you'll see the difference. This is the growth at 60 days of age. With water, the animals grow nearly 10% more. So teach them, it's going to help us a lot. And then we also have to think on vaccinating them to prevent problems that they will find after weaning. So what type of vaccines do we use early on? So very often in farrowing rooms, we tend to use Mycoplasma hyocenovia vaccines or even PCV2 vaccines, sometimes Lawsonia intracellularis at the end of lactation or early weaning, but also edema disease. I mean, those vaccines has to be placed also very early on because we want to protect very often the post-weaning phase. So just to finish with some conclusions, I think, there will be changes in legislation, changes because of the society, but we will keep producing pigs. And we have to be very efficient producing those pigs. To be efficient, we need a good genetic base, so we need good animals, but we have to do certain things very well. Acclimatize the gilts, sow feeding, sow management, and piglet management. Those key things that I was reviewing are going to be key to achieve a high productivity. Thank you very much.